writers, agents, and publishers, for the first time since the Gutenberg Press, find themselves lost in a maze of mystery as technology alters the shape of the publishing industry. Searching for Answers is a group of writers throwing pop culture, writing, and publishing into a crucible of clarity, passion, and humor. This group is the Right Pack. Welcome back to Right Pack Radio. This is your host and producer, David Allen Lucas, author of Crazy Things, and producer at Winding Trails Media, president of St. Louis Writers Guild, and with some announcements before I turn it over to everybody. But before those announcements, for everybody who's new, who's never listened to Right Pack Radio, yes, we are a huge group of writers and people who are talking about writing all different levels, and we do this for a purpose, because this is like coming to a panel discussion every week on writing. Okay, my quick announcements. Number one, in September, I will be crossing blades yet again with my author extraordinaire, Brad R. Cook. We will be September the 15th. I'm looking at him for
Yeah, that sounds about right.
September 15th
Sure.
in St. Charles. More information coming out. Watch for it. Also, too, the newsletter for Winding Trails Media will be starting up again in the fall. I have let that slide on purpose because I didn't want to give everybody nothing. I want to actually give you guys some quality content. Number 3, my voice demos as a voice actor will finally be up, hopefully by the time this airs, if not within a week or two. That has been a year-long journey. And number 4, my website will be back up about the same time. I took that down and I'm putting that back up now once I have voice acting information out there. And I have found my first short story that was ever published.
Wow.
Now I'm going to look at it and figure out if it needs to be rewritten and then re-release it. So more to come on that soon enough. I've talked for long enough, so over to my lovely co-host.
Hi, my name is Kathleen Kayembe. I'm not quite sure how to follow that because I don't have a number of announcements. But I will say that I am a speculative fiction writer and author. I publish paranormal romance under the pen name Kaseka and Vita. I'm a freelance editor, and I am beginning to run AWA workshops.
Whoa, and AWA, for those who don't know it.
Amherst Writers and Artists Method workshops. Wonderful, safe, gets you writing.
Excellent.
Delightful.
I am Lee Savage, author of the erotica for the Truly Wicked, and I just had my new release hit the market on Amazon, Surrender to the Night, prequel to Angel of Death. It's part of the St. Louisville Vampire series. And on another note, I also write under the name Carrie Lee Williams. I have a couple of children's books available.
I always find that juxtaposition interesting. And also joining us today is...
My name is Sarah Hussein. I'm a content writer in the marketing world, and I'm also have recently had my inner creative writer reignited thanks to the St. Louis Writers Guild and the Gateway Con that just passed.
Hey. And in case you haven't recognized the voice, the ads that you have heard for Gateway Con up till June, yes, that was her voice on the ads.
Is writing your favorite thing to do?
Writing is my favorite thing to do.
And also with us today is...
Yes, Brad R. Cook, author of several steampunk novels, The Iron Chronicles. Check out that trilogy. There is a ton of short stories now that are out there. Do check those out. And there is more on the way. Dun 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 dun. Find out all about it at bradarcook.com.
Also with us is...
My name is Jennifer Stolzer. I'm a children's book author and illustrator. My fantasy novel Threadcaster is available on Amazon. Currently working on the second short story in the Threadcaster universe. You can check out the first one on Amazon as well. It's called Water Curse. Tune in for Wind Curse, which is the next one, and Fire and Earth, in whatever order, will follow that at some point.
Very elemental.
And yes, so's the book.
Don't you have a book signing in September?
Not me particularly, but I illustrated a book that's coming out in September. You are correct. By Jessica Matthews, local author. It's called The Old Man and the Pirate Princess. If you live in town, you have to show up on Saturday the 9th, right? The 9th? She knew it last time. Saturday the 9th at 10 a.m. at Main Street Books in St. Charles for a pirate party. Come dressed as a pirate and you might win pirate prizes. And there's also going to be pirate activities. And of course, pirate books.
Yar!
I would
Right.
Bring your little ones because it's going to be kid-friendly and lots of pirate stuff.
I'd like to rephrase my earlier statement. Being a pirate princess is my favorite thing to do.
I'm Melanie Lucas. I'm working on my my fantasy novel. The sci-fi novel. I am still searching for that missing first draft.
Manuscripts. And with us is the murderess extraordinaire. No, the Madam of
You
Murder.
haven't murdered anyone that you've been caught for so far.
Well, I might have murdered a very small animal, but not legally. I'm Fedora Amos. I write Victorian whodunits like Jack the Ripper in St. Louis and Mayhem at Buffalo Bill's Wild West. And I will be in Scotland for the Edinburgh Book Festival. If you happen to be around Europe at that time, around the 20th or so of August, hey, look me up.
All our fans in the UK, by the way, which I do know you exist out there because I get reports of where everybody's listening from.
Because he's watching you.
Go. Well, hey, I like to know who my audience is.
He's got a-
Go. You have a chance to meet one of the right pack. And with following that,
My name is George Soroy. I'm the president of the Missouri Writers Guild. I am also a voice actor. You'll hear my voice in several productions through Winding Trails Media very soon. I am also an audiobook narrator. 2 projects that I've already completed. The children's book, Rumple Pimple, and the second book in the Paws Saga, Argentum, are currently available on Amazon. I'm also an author of science fiction for the young adult reader. Excelsior is finally up by Aloris Publishing. The ebook is up at this time of recording on Amazon, and the paperback is going to be launched later this month. Ever Upward, Part 2 in the Excelsior Journey is currently in edits and getting ready for a launch, hopefully before the end of this summer. And all 5 parts of the sci-fi sports serial from Parts Unknown are currently available for pre-order on Amazon. And by this time you can get Part 1, The Blunt Object Amendment, and Part 2, The Age of Submission, will be available for download this Tuesday at this time of recording. For more information, go to he'sgotit.com.
So many releases.
Yes.
there's a lot of news today. And today we've got a special guest with us. I'm going to let her introduce herself, but she has a connection to the right pack.
You can probably figure it out.
You'll figure it out in a second. What's the name?
My name's Olivia Stolzer. I'm a horror live blogger and enthusiast of all things terrifying.
Yeah. And we'll explain why she's so important in this next moment. But first off, we have our favorite.
Oh, yay, I'm the favorite.
I do have a character
You're not
I'm naming
supposed
after
to
you.
tell
So.
the kids that.
Right. Aw.
You're creating jealousy.
I love you still, Jen.
My name is Chanel Echan. I write stuff. I'm writing like mad currently, working on my fantasy novel that will have an end date in sight, maybe.
Positive thoughts.
Wow, lots of positive thoughts there. Well, today, and this is why I mentioned Olivia being important, because we're talking about horror, is exactly what we're doing. We are talking about horror and the power of horror. And we're also going to celebrate Mary Shelley's birthday, correct? It's her birthday, no, it's not her death day.
Not her death day.
Okay, I'm looking at Fedora.
Well, no, it's where is Brad with his phone? He's the one that does all that stuff.
Yeah.
And Dr. Google knows everything.
So, anyway, let's go ahead and let's proceed. So, horror has always been around. People have told ghost stories. Probably says Ugg told a ghost story to be paid in meat in the caveman's cave. To modern day with Walking Dead and all the fun that's out there. Vampires have been around. If you actually know the vampire lore, I know nothing to. Well, I don't know if Mary Shelley ever wrote about vampires. I don't think she did. She did write other stuff besides Frankenstein, so that's why I won't say the 100%. But vampires have been around in every culture of some kind, and even when the cultures have never talked to each other. So that's something to think about for a second. And also, as you know, we have our favorite Lee Savage, who likes to throw in horror along with erotica.
Yeah.
And sometimes vampires and other horror beings have been turned into play toys in various cultures. So, media, I should say. So let's talk about the power of horror. Starting off, go for it.
All right. So, here's the thing.
Okay.
I think we should define horror because for a long time I was writing horror and was not a horror fan because I had too narrow a definition of it. I don't like slasher flicks, but those are not the only kind of horror. So,
no, they're not.
What does horror do?
Well, who wants to go with that? Go for it.
I'll give it a shot. It seems to me that horror taps into a key fear of somebody at some point in time. Certainly, Mary Shelley did that with Frankenstein. In fact, two that I can recognize pretty readily. One is the fear of grave robbers. Because Frankenstein, as you know, was made from body parts that were salvaged from somewhere. In those days, it was illegal to dissect any corpse, for medical purposes or any purposes whatsoever. It was sacrilegious, and it was simply not to be done, except that that is the very best way to learn anatomy. And if you're a scientist, you're willing to go that route, even if it is illegal, and even if it could get you into very, very serious trouble with the law. And so that's one, the fear of grave robbers, because they really did. People dug up dead bodies and sold them as cadavers to medical schools or for medical research of one kind or another. The other fear it taps into was a relatively new fear, and that's the fear of electricity. I'm sure you've heard about Benjamin Franklin's kites and keys, but at the very beginning of the 1800s, and remember this was written in 1818, at the very beginning of the 1800s, Volta created batteries. He found a way to make electrical current by using two different metals which disattract each other, is one way to say it, I guess, at any rate. And so he created an electrical current and created then the first actual functional battery. What did they do with it? As far as I can tell, what they did with it mostly was electroplating, because people would rather have something over iron. They'd rather have silver or gold if they could afford it. It would make things look a lot prettier. And that's what they did with it at those particular moments. But as you can see, it was soon coming into real practice. The steam engine in the early 1800s, by 1817, had reached St. Louis, for goodness sake. And so we could see that there was power in these things that weren't for horses, that really had some kind of chemical or other kind of energy behind them, and we were ready to tap into it. But it's very scary. It's a game changer.
I want to tap in, no pun intended, I want to tap into what you said, and I'm going to turn this over to Sarah and then to Lee. One other part of the definition of horror as a literature, and you hear me enunciating that word very cleanly, as well, hopefully, or clear more than I would other words, because I have a tendency to mispronounce that word and make it sound like somebody who belongs in a brothel versus the actual literature. So I apologize for sounding weird. But the metaphor is the fear in the stories on horror tend to be a metaphor for social fears of the time. Fedora hit it nail on the head with what she said. In the time period that Mary Shelley was writing, there were experiments being done with electricity to try and reanimate people, bring them back to life. Of course, thus Frankenstein. There was actual scientific reports on that if you want to go that road. Also, too, the fear of electricity was very real. Let me kick people out of their textbooks regarding the American Revolution. One of the things that is not talked about in the Revolution, about the Revolution in the textbooks, was a very real fear that the British redcoats had, that America, thanks to Ben Franklin, had created some type of electric weapon that would be able to wipe out troops and actually hit all the way over into London from the continental what did at that time was the colonies.
Volta created an electric gun. It didn't really work.
It didn't work. But this fear was out
certainly
there.
tried to do that.
Yeah, this fear was out there, and thus is feeding into that and exploring it. So let me go ahead and go with Sarah, and then over to Lee.
Yeah, so to kind of like to expand on what both of you said, I think there's a third fear that is kind of combines both of them together, and it's the fear of the dead coming back to life.
Mm-hmm.
And I almost wonder if this is where the concept of zombies was inspired from. Or was that
that was
folklore
before.
prior?
That's actually prior and
People
a
have
couple
been
different
scared of
cultures.
corpses attacking them since people died.
Yeah,
I
we'll talk
want to
about that in a
go
bit. We'll come back around.
basically with all the fears, but the basic concept, if you break it down to the very minimum, no matter what genre of horror you're in, the main purpose is to tap into your fight or flight response and get those hormones and the adrenaline pumping and create that fear while you're sitting in a nice, safe place.
I feel like there are different kinds of horror, and I feel like that
Yes.
is a big one.
Mm-hmm.
The ability to tap into your fight or flight response and get that adrenaline going. But I'm also thinking about psychological horror right now, like
Like
Edgar Allan
thrillers.
Poe.
Mm-hmm.
His fiction does not make me feel fight or flight, but it does have a creeping horror element as I'm watching somebody's brain implode. Like, I'm watching someone go crazy. I'm watching someone do something that, if I were in their place, would get me arrested immediately. Was it The Telltale Heart?
Yes.
I'm thinking about that with the heart and the floorboards. And
It
Yeah,
is
that's
fun.
good.
Don't need to go fix it.
I
It
guess
is
I
fun.
so like that's a huge type of horror. That's classic horror, but it's not fight or flight. It taps into something different. So
Say it would tap into like the fear of going crazy, the fear of losing your mind and uncontrollably losing your mind, losing that control.
So then what I'm hearing is horror taps into fears that we have as people, but it doesn't necessarily have to trigger the fight or flight. Like me watching any horror movie, I want to flee.
Well, you gotta also consider if you're desensitized to that. What's gonna tap in for one person is not gonna tap into another.
Okay.
I wanted to throw out a quick example of something that captures both of those examples that both Lee and Kathleen were talking about. You're talking about psychological horror, and you're also talking about the fight or flight mentality when you are being shown something in it while you're in a safe place. That's both of those elements are things that Wes Craven tapped into perfectly when he created the Nightmare on Elm Street. Well, when he wrote and directed the original Nightmare on Elm Street. And a lot of people just kind of wrote that off as, typical, slasher and everything, when you look deeper into it, there was so much more that went into not only that character, but also the whole basic setting, because there's no other place where you're most vulnerable than when you are alone in bed, asleep.
Or
And
maybe
so,
when you're in the shower, like Psycho.
well, yeah, Psycho was
Very
was a
vulnerable.
groundbreaker that really kind of that tapped into that as well. Like if you really kind of take a look at the whole evolution of the slasher genre, even though Nightmare on Elm Street kind of transcended that, but before you had Nightmare on Elm Street, you had Psycho, you had Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you had Halloween, you had Friday the 13th, you had all these different things that were just kind of building themselves up to a point where the slasher genre kind of burned itself out in the very early 80s, and that's right in 1984. That's when Wes Craven comes along and gives it the biggest jolt humanly possible with his iconic character, Freddy Krueger.
Telltale.
No.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I'm hearing basically is, forgive me for summing this up, but it seems like horror tends to take things that are general human fears and sort of give them a lens through which we can comfortably dissect them and comfortably deal with them. Like, okay, fear of the dead, fear of new technology, fear of a stranger that may or may not have a chainsaw waiting to kill you.
He does.
Always does.
If you go into the backwoods, then yeah.
I do not. I prefer the Japanese sword. Anyway.
So basically, if I see a man with a chainsaw, in the woods, odds are he doesn't mean me any good. He doesn't want to take me out for supper.
No, he's gonna, yeah, you're gonna be supper.
And maybe a chair. So.
So I guess what I'm saying is, what horror, and to go back to the question of what is horror, it is an examination of these fears and almost a kind of way of being able to work through them, or a way to view them in a way that is not, oh, you're afraid of the dark? Let's dissect that.
Well, I think that's actually leading to the power of horror itself. And Jen, I'm going to let you go, and then...
The question to start us off with was, what is the definition of horror? And I asked the internet what the definition of horror is. And it's going to give us a broad patchwork blanket enough that we can all just sit underneath it and continue our conversation. What Chanel just described is more of the use of horror. The actual definition of horror, there are three. One is an intense, painful emotion of fear or repugnance. The other is an intense dislike or aversion. And the third is a genre of fiction meant to evoke those feelings.
Oh, look at that.
So horror is fear, yes, but it's also rejection. It's wanting to not be a part of whatever you're being shown.
Is that flight?
So it's not necessarily all about trying to frighten you. It's trying to
Shock you.
Yeah, shock, elicit that I don't like it emotion, which is what I feel is more in the splatterpunk kind of vein of horror. It's like it's horror, but mostly they're just showing you guts because guts are like, oh, guts. You're not necessarily afraid of the guts, but you don't want to look at them anymore.
It's like Herschel Gordon Lewis, like those movies from the 60s, and how they were really kind of groundbreaking in their use of very gratuitous, like blood and gore and everything, to really kind of to get that sort of repulsion kind of feeling. And nevertheless, they wound up being huge hits in the drive-in market. So
I'm going to take this back to Mary Shelly, though I'm going to say, from a personal point of view, I really don't like the grotesque, violent part of the horror because, guys, I've seen worse. Sorry, I hate to say it, I've seen worse. Give me more of a psychological aspect. I'm with you. But really quick, one of the interesting things about Mary Shelley and her choice in writing Frankenstein, if you haven't read it, I suggest you do. But if you have read it, did you notice who the actual horror element is related to? It's not to the creature. It's humanity. And it's ignorance. And that is also an aspect of the power that comes with being able to write that genre, is being able to look through, as we were talking about, looking through the lens, look through the fear of humanity, but also to turn it a bit and say, okay, humanity, you're afraid of this, but guess what? Guess who the real problem lies with is you who have the fear. I'm not sure which one, so I'll let you guys find it out.
It's also more than just ignorance. There's also arrogance.
Yes.
Victor Frankenstein is incredibly arrogant in his belief that he can do what he does. And the great thing about the book is how it's framed, because you have Victor basically, like, at the time when we first see him in the novel, he is a beaten man. He is completely empty of himself. And here he is, like, basically, like, spilling his guts to someone who is just as arrogant, just as ignorant as he is, only in a different manner.
Yep.
And that is the beauty of that. And also, that was a major, that to me was a major plus in the Mary Shelley's Frankenstein adaptation from 1994. Something that I still believe is very underrated. The fact that they kept that framework was a really big plus for me.
I want to give a little historical kind of background here, and it is something that may surprise you, that this is a romantic piece which came straight out of the Romantic era of the early 1800s. What do I mean by that? Romance is making something bigger, grander, more interesting than it would be in ordinary life. And that's the way the Shelleys lived their lives, and that's the way Mary Shelley's mother lived before her. She was, in a lot of ways, even more outlandish than Mary Shelley was. Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley was. Mary Wollstonecraft had a baby out of wedlock, and then she met up with Godwin, who was actually the father of Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. You see, she took her mother's name instead of her father's name, even though she never knew her mother because her mother died when she was just a little tiny baby, and it was her father who brought her up. But he was the kind of guy who would marry a brilliant feminist who had written a number of feminist tracts, including one that's still famous about the rights of women. And so it was a time when people had wild ideas about what was possible in the world. And it didn't have to be controlled by the aristocrats up here. It could be elemental, it could be rural, it could be a lot of things. And the Godwins both appreciated that. And of course, Mary Shelley was as wild as anybody you can imagine, running off with Percy Shelley, who was married to someone else when she was, 16, and going off with other romantic poets, Byron and Shelley. Well, if you think of a person who is a romantic poet, you think Percy bysshe Shelley. There is absolutely no one better than he was. And that's the way he lived his life, too, and was dead by the time he was 30. I mean, for goodness sake, these people live life flat out, and their writing certainly reflects that. And I think that Frankenstein does, too. Though I must say that she lived a lot longer than anybody else.
Only 53, though. She had a brain tumor.
Yeah.
That took her.
But that was a whole lot longer than Shelley or Byron or any of the others.
Took her in February, by the way, so this is her birthday month.
Yes.
Yep.
February?
August
Oh,
30th.
yeah.
Yeah, August 30th was her birthday. It is her birthday.
So I've been listening to a lot of the Writing Excuses podcast, and something that Mary Robinette Kowal has said on there is that a horror character arc is an arc in which a character who could be fiercely competent elsewhere in their life goes through a series of events in which their competence will not help them. Everything just goes wrong for them. But having watched Cabin in the Woods, which was wonderful, I've learned about horror, something I didn't know before, which was that for good horror generally, the audience has to feel like the character has made a choice, and their choices have led to this horrific series of events. So, what are some of the things that are necessary in good horror? Like, do characters always have to somehow choose the fate that befalls them?
That's a good
Okay.
question.
Do you want me to explain further?
Final Destination, they didn't choose their fate. The fate chose them.
Final Destination, they did get off the plane though.
Yeah.
They chose to go off the plane, thwarting Death
It's
Slam.
about
But
punishment.
the series of events afterwards.
What do you mean about punishment?
It's a narrative that's entered where we use horror as a moral judge to punish the wicked and, praise the good. Because the moment you make a moralistic choice in a modern horror, you die. And part of the reason for that is you have broken your moral code. Hence the reason the virgin always has sex and then dies, is to show that. You've broken your moral code, ergo you are now dead because, evil has won out. Whereas the person who is, the hero type character, who is true to themselves throughout the whole thing, and runs around saving people or not dying, basically, they get to then live or move on. And you'll see a switch up of this, but it's a big part of modern horror that I don't necessarily agree with, but yeah, it works.
Well, it leads to a good question, as, that kind of continues on our thought train. How do the trends in horror then sort of reflect the trends in modern culture and society? In Frankenstein, we were afraid of grave robbers and electricity, which are things that we don't generally fear nowadays. I'm sure grave robbing still happens, but it's not something that we're cautioned of in church anymore.
Well, there are similar fears, like the stem cell research stuff.
Yes.
But we still got them. It's not the same exactly, but it's
Yeah,
the same
but-
idea.
That's kind of what I wanted to open up, which was the idea of what are like the common, the modern day horror things that continue to crop up.
Terminator. Man versus machine.
But back to what Kathleen was saying about
Then we'll come back to this then. Go ahead.
not just deserving it, a moralistic choice. There is an element I think it's in Greek literature, it's like you're fated to something. And even when you're fated to, even when you're doomed, even when no matter what you do, you still have a choice in how you deal with your death, even if you're fated to die. But I was just thinking about The Others, which is a much more modern horror, which, by the way, the person I saw it with practically gave me a bruise grabbing my arm, but I didn't find it scary at all.
And by the way, just for record, that was not me. just for the record there.
I did, but it's a ghost story. And without giving away, it's a good movie, go see it. I'm not going to ruin it, even though it's been out for a long time. Nicole Kidman was the main character. But in that, you could see it as let's just say she's a very the victim in it. You can see her as the victim of it, but you could see it as a punishment, but she's not, you don't find out at the end she kind of brought it on herself, but, sort of.
Okay.
I mean, it's...
So, let's go back to Jen's question then, since I was back.
Yeah, I think that's what I was...
Modern day, what's scaring us? I threw out immediately Terminator, that's just an example. If you watch, this is sci-fi Battlestar Galactica, the concept of the Cylons, man versus machine, that's one example. What other examples are out there? And I do want to ask a question when we get to it. Why are zombies so popular right now? Because that's something that's been ancient.
So, I have a theory on that. So I was this actually leads into both questions. Awesome.
I'm good.
So, you are amazing. The question I had was, why when the zombie movies, zombies have been around since who knows whenever. And back in the day, there used to be the old shambling zombies. Brains. Those zombies. And then zombies started changing. Zombies started becoming these freakishly coordinated, double-jointed, hybrid, terrifying things that could scale large buildings and jump into your car and crush the hood and eat you alive. So I started thinking to myself, I'm like, okay, so what on earth could possibly have made zombies go from brains to snatch a spine out? I don't understand. But I was wondering, and then I heard someone saying it, and I latched onto the idea. The newfangled zombies aren't necessarily created the same way the old zombies were.
Yeah, true.
They are usually made by some sort of freakish virus.
Rage virus.
Right. It's usually medicine gone wrong that creates these newfangled zombies. And then, which I think feeds into this, not just fear of the dead, but fear of medicine and fear of technology.
And fear of a medical science behind it.
Ooh.
Medical outbreaks.
Olivia, then...
Leaves in order too.
Okay.
Well, with the evolution of the zombies, I think that goes back to an earlier point of desensitizing.
Mm-hmm.
We have learned the shambling zombies, find stairs, climb stairs, destroy stairs, you're good. But when the zombie can suddenly jump, up a building, that gives the reader or viewer suddenly wait, that's not the rules that I'm used to. Suddenly it's terrifying again.
They're going to stack themselves so they can climb on top of the building. Oh, yeah, that's
So
good.
I was originally going to say, and it ties in with the zombies, not only are we using viruses for zombies, but also there's a whole genre of horror that's based on the end of the world because of viruses just annihilating the world, spreading out through the population. So.
Also global warming with the big tsunami events and stuff.
Right, or the sun just...
Sure.
And weaponization.
Asteroids.
Are apocalyptic things horror, or is that a different genre?
I think
They feed on horror still, despite they're a separate genre. They feed on that.
It's a different brand of horror.
It's a different one.
Here, I'm let George, Kathleen, and
I'm
Brad
dovetailing
fight.
in, so
You're
I don't think
dovetailing.
anything.
I'm also dovetailing in, but I also just want to drop a little bit of news that literally just came in.
Zombie apocalypse right now.
Not really, not quite,
Sam's got
not quite, but it is related. It is related.
Okay.
Okay, now normally, yes, we do tape, a few weeks at a time, but I would be remiss if I did not mention this right now. Today, on July 16th, 2017, the man responsible for giving us the modern zombie genre. George A. Romero has died at 77.
So we
That's
can
not
celebrate
It
him
just
today, too.
it just so happens that
Now it's awake.
yeah.
Yes.
Which is appropriate.
I mean, I hate to bring down the mood and everything, but we need
We're already
to
at zombies.
we need to celebrate the fact that the man who gave us these zombies in the first place has moved on. So we need to
Hopefully
we
he
need to
doesn't
celebrate his
Yes.
legacy.
I was just thinking
Now
the
we
same thing.
now we must celebrate his legacy and bring him back.
Kathleen, and then Brad, and then
So-
Jordan. I've got something.
It's interesting that we've brought up the evolution of zombies because there's also been an evolution of vampires.
Oh Lord.
And one of the things we're not going to talk about that.
Actually,
And
that's
one of the
exactly what I was
things-
going to talk about.
But one of the things, no,
I
just
have a
calm
fear of
down.
sparkles.
One of the things that it occurs to me with both of these evolutions is that, as you were saying earlier, Lee, we become desensitized to what is familiar. So something publishers and Hollywood often looks for in a new anything is something that is familiar, but just new enough to be surprising and different. So zombies are shamblers. We're used to zombie shamblers. Holy crap, that thing is running. We have to go. It is suddenly scary again. Vampires are ugly and whatever. Oh my gosh, that vampire is sexy. I would totally do that. Oh my gosh, you just killed a woman.
Now they're
Scary again.
daywalkers.
Sparkles.
They can go out in the day, so you're not safe in the daylight anymore.
Go for it, Brad.
Exactly. We were asking about the evolution. So zombies actually come from a notion of the dead, the fear of the dead not staying dead, which is exactly where vampires come from. In fact, if you go back to the earliest, it's really hard to tell a vampire from a zombie apart.
Exactly.
And so this notion came from, I have buried my family member, and now I am really worried that my family member is going to dig themselves out and come back, but they're dead, so their body doesn't move well. That's where we get the shambling, kind of, draggy undead from. Now, I think if you take it back to, like, Aliens, where, like, Alien, which was a horror movie that completely changed the notion of how we did horror, because the notion of something chasing after you became huge. That, as you said, changed. We became desensitized to the mob that just slowly encroaches on you and, gets crazy like that. So we've had that nice evolution. It's a question of where do we evolve from here? Do we evolve back? Do we evolve into something else? And we're getting a lot of, like, the medical technology. As we've said, it's all switched over to viruses now. We're no longer afraid of the dead returning back. We're afraid of getting some crazy virus that's going to mutate us and, do all that kind of stuff. So it is weird. And then the other thing I wanted to bring up is that there is actually zombies, like fungus in nature, which is the freakiest thing in the world, which then leads some credibility. And, if you go back to the voodoo, the notion of the zombie slave who would then work on a plantation because they had no brain to think, they were just there to, work, be a laborer for, every day. So I wonder, that's where we pulled our sense of the zombie from, and I'm kind of curious now where we'll eventually push it into some new fear of, like, is it going to be the guy who doesn't quite wake up out of hyperspace, or maybe does wake up out of hyperspace, or,
There's already a horror movie about that. It's called Passengers.
Yes. This is true. Just saw it. Yeah.
I think right now it's the evolution of horror. I'm going to talk about actually the only zombies that scare the heck out of me that's ever been done. But I think it can't go there story-wise anymore until something gets worked out because it's owned by Paramount. And that is Star Trek. The zombies of the Borg. They are cybernetic. I assume everybody knows that's listening to us. But anyway, they are a.
We know our audience.
Yes, we do.
Well, go ahead
For
and
those
say.
who don't, technically they are a different federation because they are assimilating other cultures as they create a large empire. Think the same way as a federation, but it's not done through negotiations. It's done through, yes, resistance is futile. You're going to be a part of us. We don't care what.
So they're a hive mind.
They're a hive mind out of that.
And the fear of the Borg is the fear of losing your identity and your individuality.
Exactly.
It's a loss of self.
Exactly.
Borg, your essence will improve us and make us better.
Exactly. So you take that, and now let me go backwards in time to what Brad was saying. which is nobody can see. Unfortunately, we don't video this.
Chanel's ready to join the board.
It's just a fascinating idea. I'm like, so wait, if I know things and you know things, we can all know things together, guys.
Yes.
It's a great idea, guys.
Except we have no individuality.
Join us.
So now we're going to see Chanel's head on wire being lowered down to a body.
Chanel, if you become Borg and someone you disagree with about everything becomes Borg, you suddenly agree with half of what they have to think.
No, we could just eat them.
No, the Borg don't eat people.
We don't know
Which
that.
is why it's new and exciting and
No, we
different.
know.
Because
They plug in. They plug in.
Oh, that's right. They're all electricity based.
Yes.
Okay, we're not here to debate Star Trek.
No, we're not. But I want to go backwards, literally backwards in time. Talk about the origin of this. It actually ties in back to Mary Shelly with the experimentations that were being done to people. Back in the day, before we really knew medical science all that well, before they could allow, before society started allowing dissections and so forth, it was common to be pronounced dead and buried alive. Enough to the point that yes, thank you. I want to say into the 1800s, maybe into the 1900s, people would have bells installed into their crypts. That if somehow they got out of the coffin, and yes, this has happened very rarely, but it's happened where they actually clawed through the top of the coffin, ring the bell, and supposedly people come out and go,
It was in the coffin. It was right there with you. You just had a little string you had to
Well,
pull
that's right. That's
if
right.
you were in the coffin. You didn't have to Batman it and like smash through and climb out.
No, I'm thinking, you're right. You're right.
This was to prevent that.
You're right. I'm thinking of a story where the story where the bell didn't work. That's what caught me to it. Yes, and a person was not found alive. They died of starvation.
And the ringing of the bell was typically the bloating of the body. They weren't really alive. And
yes.
Another thing, I want to go back to something that Brad said earlier about zombies and the original voodoo notions of them. And there's actually some medical fact backing that they were poisoned with tiny amounts of pufferfish venom that would really render you absolutely impossible to think. And so there may have been some justification for that. I want to say one thing further too, that why people like horror movies is not because of their content, it's because of the exhilaration you feel in watching them, and of course being safe while doing so. But it races the blood, and that's the feeling people want and why they go to see horror movies.
I want to dovetail on Dave's thing and just remind people that they had a super nice piece of technology to tell whether you were alive or dead during that time they buried you alive. It was a mirror they held up to the mouth to see if it fogged. And if it didn't fog, you were pronounced dead. There was no listening to the heart rate. They would feel maybe for a little bit. And there was things that went around that would cause people to appear dead. And so if your mirror didn't fog, you were buried with the thing. And then also with some of the vampire lore that came from that, also there was a disease that was running around that started popping up where people became really sensitive to the sunlight. Few people still have it today. They start to crave like raw meat and things like that, and that all led into this more of this fear of vampires. There are a whole culture of people today that think they're really vampires because they cannot go out in the sunlight. They have to, they buy packs of meat and drink the blood out of it, things like that. So that all leads into that fear and help create the genre.
Some of them shop at Hot Topic.
They were on TV throughout all of the 90s.
Related to that, if you look up the symptoms of rabies and look up what some of the traditional vampire symptoms, there's a whole lot of overlap.
So I always wanted to dovetail off of Fedora because one of the things that makes this is. I'm sorry, I'm trying not to go off on a social rant here, but the nice safe scare is what this is after. It's like the same reason that you go on a roller coaster or go to a haunted house. Because you go to a haunted house, you know that the person that's there is not actually going to beat your head in with that pipe. It's hopefully. The same reason you go to a roller coaster is, in theory, this is not always true, but in theory, you're going to be perfectly fine at the end of it. You go to a horror movie so that you can get that punch of adrenaline and then still walk away back to your house and feel safe. Now, my favorite thing, my favorite thing is when if I'm in a horror movie, a horror story, a book, not a movie, a book, is when I have to walk it off. You get to the point where you're so scared, you're just like, I gotta put it down. Okay, gotta walk it off. Can't handle that. But you can put it down. You can walk it off. It's a nice, safe scare, which is like almost like a understimulation. We're so understimulated that we have to scare ourselves for the fun of it, kind of thing.
Which is going to raise up a topic I want to talk about after Olivia goes. I want to ask everybody, so I'm going to put this ahead in your brains now. What is your favorite piece of horror fiction? Be it movies or books. Olivia, Phil, you've been waiting, so please go ahead and then we'll start.
Well, I would say as far as the safe scare, of course I take in a lot of horror media, but nowadays I qualify something good as if it stays with me and terrifies me days after I have consumed it.
Yes.
I've read books that I still think of years later that terrify me. Some of the best movies I saw in high school, I was so scared to go in the basement that I would sidewind against the wall so that no one could get the upper hand on me. I have friends that slept with their parents after seeing The Ring for weeks. I think there's a certain element, I think, of something, in my opinion, being really good is that it stays with you
So true.
so much far after you've taken in that media.
So what's your favorite horror?
Yeah,
Oh,
because you
we'll start
clearly
that one
had a
off.
powerful impact on
Nothing
it.
like putting you immediately on the spot.
Oh goodness.
Now you want written, not.
No,
Any medium. Yeah.
Oh,
You want us to come back to you?
yes, no, that's
Okay.
too hard.
She's like, which genre of horror do
Who
you
wants
want?
to go? I've got 3, but go ahead. You'll go first?
Yeah, I can go first. So, okay, normally I am a horror movie enthusiast,
Okay.
mostly because I haven't read enough horror fiction to be able to compare the two. But I just recently bought off Amazon one of those virtual reality headsets, and I tried one of those virtual reality horror apps.
Nope.
I recently discovered that shit scares me. My media might be shifting. And I haven't been scared like that since I was a kid watching Gremlins. It was like a whole nother level of fear.
Right?
Oh, okay.
Well, you had your hand up. So.
Yeah, to throw it out, so it's really, I guess, the only horror fiction I've ever read. Because I guess after this I was like, never again. And that's it. And I know that it's like, and we haven't talked about what, I don't know where, like, because clowns weren't evil, but now they are.
That's always been creepy.
I don't know.
Those smiles are fake.
I don't know which came first.
There was a
the
clown
evil
serial
one. There
killer.
was, yes, there
Yes,
was.
there
So
was.
good
Not
point.
Gacy.
Dunwich Gacy.
Yeah. So I would throw that out probably as the first one, but I would actually throw out that to go back to what Olivia was talking about and some of the things that we do that kind of make it stay with us. I actually still have problems going down stairs that are open because someone's going to reach out and snag you, and that is a total childhood fear from wherever. And then things you still do to this day because you saw them in horror movies. I don't really actually pay attention when spells start being cast on TV because of some movies I've seen where they cast spells across entire cities and stuff like that. And if you watch it and listen to it, you're dead. So, it's kind of fun stuff but, to this day, weird stuff like that because it's stuck with you. So I would actually define that's probably the best horror. Stuff that makes you change the way you live your life.
Let me get back to you on that after cast because there's a reason behind that.
Well, I'm with Lemony Snicket. I don't think that Stephen King is very, very horrifying.
I agree.
Never have. But I will tell you somebody that I think is, and that's Ira Levin and Rosemary's Baby. I read that in a single sitting, and I really like this by the end of it.
Shaking.
I was.
I'm in the same boat as Sarah regarding being a horror film enthusiast. My personal favorite franchise of films is, as I mentioned before, the Nightmare on Elm Street series. I strongly recommend the 4-hour documentary Never Sleep Again that covers all 8 films in great detail, and even throws a few well-deserved shots of the 2010 remake, which was not very good. And that's the kindest thing I can really say about that. But if I were to pick out one piece of horror that I would recommend to anyone that I believe stands above and beyond everything, it would be both the book and the film of The Exorcist. And that is actually like an element that really kind of scares me more than anything. That really kind of goes back to both zombies and the Borg, as well as with The Exorcist and everything. And that's a part where everything that you are is being taken away. That to me is the most terrifying thing, and that's something that will always terrify me until the day I move on from this earth.
I will have to say that, like George, mine was Nightmare on Elm Street. I remember watching that as a child, and that was the first movie that scared me so much. And I think part of that was my father's fault, because I had to go to the restroom during the movie, and then he yells out, "It's behind you!" And it's like dark, and the hallway wasn't lit up yet, and I go running. Scared out of my life, and then from that point I didn't want to put my feet down because I was afraid he was going to reach out under the couch and get me. I was so terrified for weeks after that movie. And then the ending scene where you think everything's okay and he pops out and grabs the mom was just like, I can't believe it. No,
Even though
it
it's great
just
when she
left
goes to
such
the window.
a
It's fantastic when she goes to the window.
It just like scared me so much, and the song in that innocent little song was so creepy. You start to lay down in bed to go to sleep at night, and you would hear that like playing in your head still, and it's still terrifying to this day. That movie still makes me jump, and most movies I become desensitized after I've seen it a couple times. I no longer get the jump scare anymore. That one still will do it to me every time.
Okay, so I'm riding the edge here because there are a couple things that, like, one thing in particular that stuck with me just in terms of the zombies was, I guess it was new then, the what is that movie with Will Smith and
I Am Legend.
Yeah. Those zombies creeped me the hell out because they had a vendetta. They were not mindless zombies or vampires or whatnot.
Yeah, I was going to say, those are the ones that toe the line. They were like the old vampires that were like half zombie, half vampire.
Right.
I think in the book, they're vampires.
In the book, they're vampires.
Yeah.
But the way that they did them in the movie was different than the book. They changed a lot of things. But it creeped me out because I would be driving home and I would see all this like really quick movement on my eye. I'm like, what the hell was that? What was that? I almost crashed my damn car into the guardrail trying to look for zombies. But that was something that stuck with me. But in terms of like my favorite is the movie What Lies Beneath. I really enjoyed that movie just because it kind of told this line between like marital drama, but then there's also like there's enough drama going on there already, but then there's also this supernatural element to it, that the fact that it was laid on top of this almost not mundane, marital drama isn't mundane, but mundane story just made it all the more creepy for me, because it was like, here's a normal life, and then here is something terrible and terrifying that goes on top of it.
I'm glad that somebody brought up games, because
I was going to do a game.
Yes.
Are you going to do the game I was going to do?
No, so you should bring it up anyway.
Okay.
There's an audio adventure game called The Nightjar that unfortunately I can't re-download on my phone. Thanks, iPhone, for updating. Anyway. Well, actually, I'm glad they updated. But anyway, it is an audio adventure. So what you do is you put on a pair of headphones and you hear your way through this.
Nope.
And you use your thumbs or your fingers to walk in the game and to turn So there is nothing really visual on your phone except you have to do it all basically. It's easier with your eyes closed. But there are monsters in the dark with you, and you can't friggin' see. And that is part of the game. And Benedict Cumberbatch can be really friggin' creepy when he wants to be. So
What do you mean when he wants to be?
So that game was wonderful and creepy and gave me all the visceral reactions of fear and like running for my life and stumbling and dying. And it was great. There's another game that I have not finished playing because I cannot, and it's called Lost Within, and I am too scared. I can see these things, and they can see me, and I can't handle that much interaction with the dead and the experimented upon and the murderous.
Well, my favorite piece of horror media, I'm different in my horror tastes. I don't like being scared very much, and I'm happy when it doesn't follow me. I love a good creeping. I really love the atmosphere of horror. So I love horror games, and my favorite game franchise is the Silent Hill franchise.
Yes.
The movies are terrible, which is
Yes.
another aspect I love of horror, because a bad horror movie is hard to match. Bad horror movies are the best thing ever. So I love the first Silent Hill movie for a completely different reason, but the Silent Hill games franchise, at least the first 4, are they very much are tapping into this feeling of being alone in a hostile environment, but not like, you have to fight your way through. Combat is very difficult and clunky. There's no way to aim really properly, and the entire town, this quaint American town that should be a very pleasant place, it's actually a resort town in real life, but you go into it and it's covered in fog, and you can't see but feet in front of you, and you hear things moving around. And the second one is a masterpiece, even if you don't like video games. I'm going to suggest something that might be foreign to many people. See if you can find someone who's played it on YouTube without commentary, because if they're gabbing over it the whole time, you're going to ruin it. But someone who, if you don't play video games, you don't want to run around with the controller and do all the puzzles or whatever, just that sort of atmospheric story. I've played that game for people on Halloween as our Halloween thing. I finished it in 5 hours. Sat down and played through the whole game, and my non-gamer friends and my gamer friends who'd watched it look up and went, "That was amazing. The twist at the end, and the atmosphere, and the sound design, and, how can I cosplay one of those nurses? That kind of thing." So that's my recommendation for my favorite piece of horror media.
Yes, I'm going to go ahead and close it out because I know we're on time. Go ahead.
Olivia, no, you didn't have one?
Oh, goodness.
Have to pick out your favorite child.
Yeah.
What's your most recent one?
Most recently, well, I would suggest, it's on Netflix so people can look it up, The Hallow. It's a nature versus humanity kind of ancient Irish folklore horror. 2 words, flaming scythe. If that doesn't intrigue you, I don't know what would.
Watching this tonight. Okay.
Then I am going to close it out. By the way, if you want to know the power of horror, I hope that you've been paying attention to this entire discussion. I think everybody's favorite piece of media kind of identifies where that power is coming from. I've actually got 2 that tie, and for different reasons. Like Fedora earlier, I don't find Stephen King scary at all. Sorry, Stephen. Of course, you make a lot more money at writing than I do, so I need to shut up. But on that, but point blank, it's not the case. Most of Anne Rice's work I don't find scary, but one I do. And it's the only book that I know of. She set up for a sequel and has never come back to it. And I'm sad that that's the case. Is The Mummy, or Ramses the Damned. I thought it was her best piece of writing, in my personal opinion, because it had me captured in the first paragraph into a page turner. But there's a scene where Ramses is bringing Cleopatra back to life. That scared me talking about it, starting to get goosebumps. So this tells you, and I've read that back 1989, 1990. So Yeah, and really, Jennifer will tell you because she's sitting next to me. I really
Yeah.
do have goosebumps.
It is authentic.
Number 2 is Edgar Allan Poe's The Cask of Alimentalo. I think part of the fear, obviously, is really well done. I can imagine being walled up alive, which is spooky. But what I think makes me fear it the most, if this turns out to be an urban legend, que sera, sera, but from what I understand, from what I've read, somebody 100 years later committed the actual crime to a T who had never read, nevertheless heard of Edgar Allan Poe. And on that note, have a great week writing. Tune in next week for yet another interesting topic in the writing industry. Thank you for listening. The new theme songs for Right Pack Radio were written and performed by Meredith Tate. All copyrights remain with her. Writers, agents, and publishers, for the first time since the Gutenberg Press, find themselves lost in a maze of mystery as technology alters the shape of the publishing industry. Searching for Answers is a group of writers throwing pop culture, writing, and publishing into a crucible of clarity, passion, and humor. This group